Nobody knew that we're saying it on the side. And I saw the sign for VHB and then, yeah.
But then we had a 5-hour layover. It was expected. Oh, yeah. And so by the time we got on the plane, my mom had 2 brothers. One from my mom, like the longest.
Hi, welcome back, commissioners, and back to you, Chair Harrington.
Okay, well, here we are back in the work session of Tuesday, September 20th, 2022, with the full complement of 5 commissioners. I want to thank staff for their flexibility as our business meeting got over pretty swiftly today. So we're picking up with agenda topic number 2, Housing Authority Rehabilitation Projects Update with our Executive Director, Comey Calavar, and the Assistant Director, Josh Price. Welcome, Comey.
Good morning, Chair Harrington. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Comey Calavar, Housing Director. I will be joined by Josh Price, Assistant Director, and also Zach DeGrog.
Oh, great.
That's our consultant for this presentation. We'll provide an update on phase 1. As you recall, we came to you in 2020 for phase 1, 332 units. Rehabilitation of the Housing Authority portfolio. Portfolio needed it at that time, and we are working on phase 2 now. Phase 2 will be about 277 units, and equally big transaction, but we'll give a transaction overview and then Q&A. The next slide. So phase 1, quick update on phase 1, and then I have Josh jumping on phase 2. The conditions, and then a transaction overview, and then we'll all answer questions. So we came to you, like I said, 2020 for phase 1. We were able to close successfully. June this year was 150 million transaction and 332 units. We also paid down the county's bonds. The history was 2008, 2009, the economy was suffering, the Housing Authority portfolio suffered as well. And the county stepped in to help the Housing Authority with a $29 million bond issuance. Commissioner Rogers knows all about it. We refinanced those bonds in 2019 for $24 million. And with the transaction in June, we paid down about half of that. And with this phase 2 transaction, we're paying down, well, we don't know the amount yet. We're still working through the transaction details.
One geeky question. What was the interest rate we had to pay on the new bonds? Just out of curiosity.
4.35. And we are using about 5.5 as an underwriting rate for phase 2. Hopefully we don't get overtaken too much because if interest rates keep going, the deal will suffer, but we are hopeful. And construction has started on the phase 1 rehab, Bonita Villa, which is in Tigard, and then Reach at Bull Mountain, also in Tigard, are 2 of the properties that had the most deferred maintenance. So construction has started on those. So just a couple of photos, Bonita. So the work is ongoing. Our contractor is LMC. They do very good work. They were the builder of the Valfrey in Forest Grove that just opened. So strong reputation, good builder. So phase 2 is what we are getting ready to start. And we are just excited for phase 2 as well. It'll be an 87 million transaction. And so with this, Josh, you ready?
Yeah, I'm here. Everyone can hear me. Well, good morning, Chair Harrington and Board of Commissioners. I also know we'll make sure that our Housing Authority board members, Mike Savara and Caroline Roper, are able to hear this as well. Josh Kreitz, I'm the Assistant Director of the Housing Department. Happy to be here with you this morning. As Comey mentioned, you saw some pictures. The work is well underway on phase 1. We're excited to ensure the sustainability of those 5 properties into the long-term future as affordable housing. And as Convene mentioned, we are just as excited to get going on phase 2. This again is part of our strategic repositioning of our current affordable housing assets. With all the Metro bond deals that are getting done and all the new housing underway, it's just as important to sustain our current affordable housing stock. So again, Convene mentioned, as part of this project, we're committing to addressing the remaining the housing stock. We're going to defease the remaining bonds. Some of the major goals of this project, we're going to take care of all the deferred maintenance and capital needs. We're going to ensure that the financial structure is in place for long-term healthy operations. We'll defease the outstanding bonds. And then if possible, we want to generate fees called developer fees, which come back to the housing authority, which allows us to spur other future development and other rehab. I will mention there are some properties, 185th Street duplexes, we call them. We're going to defease the bonds on those, and it's going to free us up to do some different work. It won't be included as part of the rehab, but it's going to free us up to do some really interesting things. So we're looking at some different partnerships on how we can use those properties. That's just a side note. Next slide, please. Really nice kind of geographic equity here when you think about the disposition of our affordable housing portfolio: Maryland Court, Van Rich, Holly Tree, Amberwood, Tarkington Square, and Cornelius. Everything from Forest Grove to Cornelius to Hillsborough to Beaverton. So we're really excited again. I mentioned this when we did HP4. This is a partnership. This is a win-win for the cities. It's a win-win for the residents. It's a win-win for our community. So we're really excited to be able to impact these communities positively. Next slide, please. Just to give you some ideas, Maryland here, we have tree roots causing sidewalk issues. Inside, you can see in the bathrooms, failed bathroom ventilation systems are some of the work that we'll be doing. Next slide. Over at the Van Rich, we have dilapidated decking, siding, soffits, and railings that will be getting replaced, uneven, non-conforming paved surfaces. So just a lot of really good work going in here, siding, roofs, all the major components with these different existing buildings. Next slide, please. On this proposed transaction, we're going to form the Hawk AHP Limited Partnership to operate the portfolio as a low-income housing tax credit project. This is just like phase 1, and we'll lease the land and buildings to the partnership as part of a 99-year lease, so to maintain the ownership. The Housing Authority of Washington County will actually act as the developer, sponsor, and general partner of this partnership. And the partnership will rehab the property, spending around $35 million. So pretty significant rehab on these properties. Again, our goal is to generate funds necessary to also defease the remaining bonds from the full faith and credit obligation. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn it over to our one of our consultants who we're working with Bronner and Company, and that's Zach DeGorge for the public. From Bronner and Company. Their company has been working with the Housing Authority of Washington County since 2019.
Thank you, Josh. Yeah, as Josh mentioned, I'm Zach DeGorge with Bronner and Company. I'm the managing director for the company, and we've been working with the Housing Authority for several years now, and completed phase 1 and are under construction right now. So really excited to be here to talk about the rest of the portfolio. I think as Josh mentioned on the previous slide, I think the goal with phase 2 is to really build upon the success of phase 1 and to incorporate some efficiencies through replicating a very, very similar transaction for the remainder of the portfolio. So as Josh just mentioned, similarly, a tax credit syndication where the authority will be the developer and general partner. And the slide in front of you just shows a very high-level overview of the sources and uses of what we anticipate at this time. Again, the primary source really for the development is the tax credit equity that is generated by the tax credit partnership. Further, the private activity bonds that you see here are part of that 4% tax credit program. That is the new debt that would replace the existing bonds that will be defeased with the properties. The seller financing, I'll explain actually on the next slide, but that is an important element as well. And then you'll see the cash from operations. That's really just the normal cash flow during the construction period that normally would be going to pay principal and interest, but those loans aren't amortized until after the construction period. So that cash flow during the construction period goes to pay construction interest during that time. In terms of the uses, again, the existing value of the assets, I'll talk about in the next slide in a minute of how that works with the seller financing. And then as Josh mentioned, the construction is critical here at $35 million. Again, on phase one, we're at about $50 million. But here we've got a slightly fewer units. So from an allocable percentage, this is still a significant rehab based on our initial inspections of the properties. And then you've got soft costs, developer fees, and reserves. So these are all include your interest and all of the soft costs related to title and legal and surveys, things like that. The developer fee, which the authority earns, and then new reserves that will be in place to help the properties in the future, which is a really critical element of this. Again, we're addressing all the outstanding capital needs for a very long period of time, but it's also really important to ensure that in the future the properties are set up for success. And to do that, we initiate an initial reserve and then also add ongoing deposits to those reserves so that these properties aren't in the scenario that they're in right now in the future. Next slide, thank you. So again, as I mentioned, this is the critical piece to understand the transaction proceeds here is that just like in phase one, the authority is leasing the land and assets to the partnership for an extended period of time, 99 years. And then for tax credit purposes, the reason for doing this is that it generates what we call tax credit basis. So that investor equity that you saw on the previous slide is generated by this lease and the value of those assets. So in return for receiving that payment, the authority of $39,700,000, which is what we estimate at this time, those funds will be used to pay off existing debt. There's one loan at one of the properties that is not associated with the full faith and credit, but that would be repaid from those proceeds. You'll see here that a portion will go towards defeasing the remaining bonds. That's what's estimated right now for the total cost to do that at $11,500,000. Then the balance is that seller financing you saw on the previous slide. So that's not money that the authority is coming out of pocket on. That's money that's generated by that lease to the partnership. So it's really what we like to call a paper transaction. But for the purposes of the authority's balance sheet, it's an actual receivable, which is sometimes viewed as a positive thing. Then there's the existing reserves, which you'll see here, which will go to actually replenish new reserves for the properties. And then finally, the cash developer fees that the authority will receive. So there's a little asterisk here at the bottom, and I think it's really important for the board to understand that at the moment, we're projecting proceeds in excess of $4 million right now. But again, we're very early in the process, and I think others will describe a little bit more detail in terms of a timeline of what this really looks like. But we're a ways away, and a lot can happen in terms of interest rates, which we've already underwritten a pretty healthy reserve for that, but things could obviously change. Construction could increase. Relocation is very, very critical. So, similar to phase one, our goal here is that at the end of the day, the authority doesn't have to spend a penny. I think what I would call icing on the cake would be an opportunity to generate proceeds that would help the authority for future endeavors, for future new development or other activities. And that's certainly what we're projecting right now. But again, very early, and that is our hope, is to be able to generate those. But again, we're at an early stage here. All right, next slide.
Real quick, Zach. So in terms of lease to the partnership, that's the value of the assets that we are putting into the partnership, currently owned by the housing authority, but moving into this new tax entity that we are creating so we can access the finance. So
Do we book those? Do we book those as an asset?
yes, they are assets right now.
Of the county and the housing authority, not.
Correct. They are assets right now, but they will not be after we close. They'll be. transferred into the partnership.
Yeah, so the partnership is gonna recognize the asset, yeah.
Exactly. And one thing I'll add that I think is
Lease
important.
accounting is over
Yeah.
my head, but yeah.
I'll tell you.
Zach understands it though.
Well, I think from a public perspective, what's important is that the authority maintains fee ownership in the land and the buildings. And so for tax purposes, there's a transfer of these assets that is evidenced through a long-term lease. But in terms of public benefit, these properties are still technically owned by the housing authority, but the authority enters into this long-term lease with the partnership so that the tax credit investor realizes those tax benefits, which is what the exchange is for that tax credit equity. Josh, did you want me to take this one or?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
I'll take the next one.
So as you can imagine, and as the board has seen with the first phase, this is a very long process, and really this is the beginning stages of this, and why we want to get started because there's a lot to learn and a lot to develop here. And as you can see, we're really not projecting this transaction closing until probably November of next year. So there's a lot of work to do between now and then to refine some of these assumptions and get this project really going. So the first step is developing that scope of work, and we've started that process. So with the authority, Bronner & Company has now inspected all of the units in the second phase, and we're in the process of developing what we call the owners program. The owners program is really developed as a means to initiate the scope of work. And so this is something that's actually handed off to the general contractor once they're selected as the basis for what the authority would like to see in the construction. So rather than turning the contractor loose and them really driving that process, the authority really drives that process from the beginning. So an important critical piece of that. What will be asked of the board in early October is specifically the approval to form this partnership that will engage in these activities. It won't authorize closing, which as you saw on the first phase of the transaction, there will be subsequent board resolutions authorizing financing and closing and so on and so forth. But this first step is really forming the partnership and authorizing some of those pre-development expenditures, which then subsequently are reimbursed to the authority at closing. So that's the next sort of really legal next step, is forming that partnership. We're anticipating going out to bid to select a general contractor, an architect, and hopefully have them on board in December. And then beginning discussions with the county to engage with council and really start that process for defeasing the bonds. We learned quite a bit in phase one and really had a great team put together that made that really successful. So starting those conversations really early to make sure that that we're well prepared for that. In terms of the financing, selecting the lender and investor, probably in the April-May timeline, and then getting permits submitted, applications towards the summer. Again, like I said, closing's really in that November timeline, so we would come back to the board probably in October of next year to approve the actual defeasance and the final transaction authorizations and financing related to that. The bonds would be defeased just prior to the transaction closing. There's some state regulation that ensures that those bonds are first defeased prior to the tax credit closing, so that would occur before. And then construction would commence really over a 2-year period to complete that process. Next slide.
So as we step into what our next steps are, we'll come to the Housing Authority Board in October with a resolution to form the tax credit partnerships, giving us the availability to submit funding applications to solicit our lenders and investors, and to expend up to $1.5 million in pre-development expenditures. And it should be noted that the authority is reimbursed at closing, as we were in phase one. October through December of 2022, form the tax credit partnership, as Zach mentioned, procure general contractor, third-party reports. We'd refine our budget assumptions at that point. A lot going on with interest rates, obviously. The construction budget, get a relocation budget, as tenants will have to either be temporarily or permanently relocated in some cases. Get our lender investor pricing in order. And it just refined the soft costs and acquisition values. Again, coming back in October of 2023 to the Housing Authority Board with the omnibus resolution to approve finance and closing and defease existing bonds. Next slide, please. So as we wrap up here, we obviously want to hear from the board any questions, any concerns that you might have, and just kind of open it up before we come to the board next month, the Housing Authority Board.
Commissioners, do you have any questions or comments on this proposal from staff? None from Commissioner Rogers, Willie, Priest, thumbs up. Commissioner Fry's all set. Okay, I will just add that I really appreciate the work that you all have done to bring forward a proposal that refreshes the portfolio state of condition in order to extend the life of the affordable housing that the Housing Authority of Washington County manages. It's a real tribute to the excellence of you, Mr. Calavar, and your staff. And I appreciate in working with the expert consultancy of Braun and Company, how you've taken advantage of financial instruments in managing the assets, being the land and the buildings over time, and doing the due diligence in a way that is both thorough and responsible, as we would expect from a public agency, as well as being open and transparent with everyone in our community, as well as thoughtful with the residents who will need to relocate as these as these homes are improved upon. So thank you very much. I know it's an arduous process. It takes, multiple years to do this work, but these are buildings in our community that serve our community well. And I have every confidence in you in the steps ahead. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair Harrington. Thank you, commissioners.
And thank you for your flexibility in joining us at this time. I appreciate it. So now we are at 20 minutes before 12. Our next topic has outside speakers, so I'm not sure if we'll be able to do it now or need to pick back up at 1 o'clock.
I believe staff are ready to pick back up at 1 o'clock unless Marty has an update. Yep, pick back up
Okay.
at 1 o'clock. Thank you.
So at 1 o'clock, we'll pick back up with topic number 3 on Washington County Reimagine Oregon Project Work Plan Update on Health and Wellbeing. And then we'll go into the next topic, Major Streets Transportation Improvement Program. It is an update. And then after that, we'll have a break in the afternoon. We'll have an executive session, but hopefully we'll be completing sometime during the 3 o'clock hour. Okay, terrific. Well, have a good lunch break and we'll see everyone back at 1 o'clock. Thank you.